Okay, for people joining this live stream, we are talking about the compiler and its feedback to users about where it has found errors. So, Tom, take it away.
Yes, fine. Okay, so the idea is to provide markup showing where the error is in the input. So it's possible to the compiler can generate a version of the input which shows where the error arose, and now what we can't do is track this to the actual source. And then when we talked about this before, you talked about a compilation error actions option that would control what to do with this. So that seems like what the default would be. Now, I don't know if we need to go through with this, but these are the sorts of things that can be done. So here's I'm doing a function compile and I'm applying sign to something that's a Boolean, and there isn't a sign of Boolean, and so that's an error. And so I can generate this, it wraps a compilation error around this. So obviously that would be marked up specially. Now, we have to think about when there are function declarations.
So hold on. So the first thing you're showing is that at a pure symbolic level, the thing returns when you say that func equals function compile blah blah blah. It is returning on its output line. It is returning something which has wrapping around the error position. Is that correct?
It's return. Yes, that's more or less right. Yes, it's returning a failure object. And in that failure object is information telling it how to find.
Wait a minute. Where's the failure object? I don't understand. Your output.
I put a semicolon. I put a semicolon there. I mean,
okay, so let's see it.
Right. Fine. Well, I'll run this. I have to run this in a different branch.
Okay, well,
you want to actually see this running, or you want to see the?
No,
failure?
I just want to.
Okay, fine. Right. Well, I can just do this.
Tom, but it's in. It's in my. There's one already in the UX.
Yeah, fine. Right. Oh, right. Yes. Well, no. Well, let's let
as in that exact example. Yeah.
So, right. Eventually, right. So here's the failure object here. Right.
Okay. So what's the relationship of that to the out line after the FFX?
Well, somewhere down in here, there's a source thing here, and the source thing here contains the information about where it lives in the original expression.
Okay. Not using the modern code tree AST stuff. Some other method of knowing where it is.
Possibly. No. There isn't enough information there. No, because this is right. Okay. So, and this is just showing different sorts of errors it can track. I mean, these will have to be worked through. Now, some tricky issues, when there are functions.
I'm drowning here. I don't understand what the overall point is. So the overall point is what you're doing is you're having symbolic wrapping of the input, in which you're returning the input as part of the failure object with wrapping that indicates where.
Hang on. Right. Fine. Noah. Why doesn't it's probably more useful if Noah shows his stuff, because I think that would be more helpful to you actually. Noah, why don't you?
Sure. Yeah. So you can see that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Great. Okay. So yeah, I mean, Tom just described the premise of what we're doing. And so the idea is that, we want to add a control to be able to show, essentially some marked up input, a marked up copy of the input. And so, the sensible place to put this really is on the end of the message, because the message is always going to be thrown in this case. Of course, as we saw with what was on Tom's screen, this failure object, so that seems a natural place to put this. You may not see it. So it really has to be the message. And so I'm putting this little sort of source button here on the end of, a compile error message. So this is kind of like, I guess, the simplest example. You click this button, and then this message, just kind of expands open, and you see essentially what Tom was showing, but instead of it being wrapped with compilation error or whatever it was, it's now just underlighted and sort of highlighted here.
But so however long that input was, if that was a 20-line input, the 20-line input would be repeated underneath the message. Is that correct?
So yes, but we can do things like, clip it with a pane so that it doesn't take up, or like, a whole screen of notebook. Sorry, and I was going to make another point, which I've just forgotten. But yes, we can clip it. And I've got an example of that Yeah. So this is like a really long section of code, and it's sort of clipped it and scrolled to the bit that's marked up.
So one question, and maybe this is exactly what the breadcrumb example is that you're going to show later is, I mean, there might be cases where you really need the whole stack trace because it's, the bottom function call that failed is, oh, you can't, it'll be something really random, but you need to look higher up in the stack to see what the problem
that's
was.
exactly what the breadcrumb is.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Just before I move on from this section, I'll just make the point that there are some sort of conceptual similarities to Brenton's code analysis pods, but this is distinct, and so that's why it kind of looks similar, but it is intentionally designed differently, so that it's sort of you're not going to get the two confused, hopefully. But yeah, so then we've got like
sorry, one other quick, sorry to interject, but one other quick thing would be, is there anything that's compiler specific about this, in the sense that I know there's been talk about having sort of better stack traces with all messages at various points. I wonder if maybe this design would also be relevant for that.
So
but that's kind of an aside.
Well, can I say one thing there? This is not a runtime analysis. This is a compile time analysis. So that's
sure. But there's similar things that you might be able to get from runtime stuff.
Yes.
So yes, you're right. And what one difference is that here, because these errors are fatal, right? That's why I've kind of been able to just head this kind of provenance pod with the message, and therefore you're kind of looking at just like the path, the source of that one message. With if you've got an input, if you've evaluated an input and then a bunch of message, there's a message spew, then you might want to sort of make a copy of the input with several kind of message sources marked up, and then in that case it makes sense to do more like what we're doing in code analysis, where it's a little more structured. You can list things out at the bottom, and there's no reason why you can't mark everything up at once, right? So you could have both message provenance and code analysis in this, and you just list them all out, underneath. And so yes, there are similarities, but I still think it's this is it's a slightly different problem that is asking for a slightly different UX.
Right. Okay. Well, but actually for some other context though, for the error handling working group stuff, I mean, one of the ideas is to have, there's going to be some I don't remember exactly what the design is, but there's going to be some raise function which produces a failure object that is sort of a definitive, usually fatal error that will usually go all the way to the top, and the plan is for that to include some kind of nice stack trace of some kind. So this might be more relevant for that case, but maybe we're getting a little off topic. Okay. But yeah.
Well, I should get myself caught up on that then, because yes, it sounds like that's the UX could be similar in both cases, if not the same, really.
Yeah,
okay,
nothing else. I'm going to send this screenshot to that group. So yeah.
Okay, so the basic point here is a compile time error is generated. This source button is a way of showing it's kind of an enhanced error message. Now, I suspect there are other error messages elsewhere in the system which would also benefit from the possibility of a kind of enhanced information about the error type, opener below the message, so to speak. I mean, in other words, for millions of years, messages have been pure text. We're now going out of the pure text, domain to this possibility of having an additional tray or whatever you call it underneath the actual message. And
messages have a more info on the left. I mean, there's stuff there that,
but it's pretty limited.
It's limited, but I mean, the point that we're making here, and this could be accessed from something on the left as well. The point we're making here is that there's another place where you can put information about an enhanced information about a message in this tray mechanism. That's what Noah is proposing here, basically. That there is
this could be generalized. Yeah.
Yeah. So in other words, I mean, just brainstorming for a second about other messages that, I mean, anybody think of any other messages that would benefit from such a tray?
So just presumably, it's not necessarily, you're saying that kind of anything that might go in that tray, not just the
Yeah.
provenance.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that it could be, yes, but I mean, this is,
Well, but what are we saying? The defining feature is just that it has highlighted code in it.
probably. But I mean, yes, why aren't we putting, you know, any message has provenance, right? Which is visible in the stack trace on the left to some extent, but this is an alternative provenance mechanism. Why wouldn't this be something that any message could benefit from?
Sure.
Well,
Yeah,
but I think that there often isn't useful highlighted code, as you see if you ever look at
Yeah, but there might
the
be other
stack trace
things.
on the left.
If you had if you were loading a file and you got a syntax error, you could have a thing to open the file.
Sure, yeah, that could be nice.
That might be useful.
But
I think it may make more sense to first just consider this in the context of the compiler, where it's fairly well defined, and then try
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
generalize it. But
fair enough. Okay.
Yeah, at least we have all the code there, and it's not part of the kernel or something like that. If it's part of the kernel, then you can't introspect it again. It's only really for top level code.
No, I understand, but there was always some in the stack trace. There is always some head that generated the message. You could always show the code highlighting that head, so to speak, or that sub-expression.
Right. I mean, there's a function there's a function that should exist. You know, maybe in the function repository or something. It's like a, you know, pretty stack trace or something, where it basically just takes, you know, this sort of extended output of stack, but then produces some fancy thing like this, which I think you could make a basic version of with just the information from stack, and that would show, you know, right, that would basically show it in a way where you as a human can actually navigate it.
Yes, well, why not? I mean, that seems like a good thing for somebody to try to build. That will be the direct analog of this. But okay, for the compiler, there's code, there's highlighting of which part of the code had the error, which we could generalize. And what else to say about this? So this case where it's tiny, it's all rather straightforward. But now you're going to show more stuff with bigger cases down below.
Sure, and where you've got sort of, you know, functions referencing other functions, and so yeah, I mean, in you know, if you open the pod in this case, you've now got like a breadcrumb trail, and so it's kind of in reverse order, like your inbox would be, I guess, where the kind of the root source is open by default and at the top, and then, you know, the next kind of place where that function was called is underneath it. I don't know if this is, I'm almost certain this would require C++ support, so I don't know how soon we could have such a thing, but if we could link to, like, if what have I said? Link to the cell containing its function if the cell still exists, and, you know, maybe include some indication if the cell's been added. You know, some way of kind of, you know, clicking that and then going to, if that is the right thing. Yes, it is.
So,
going to that cell.
Case number one is it's explicitly visible. You can wait a minute. In this particular case, it's giving you compilation failure markup ux.nb. What does that mean? That's
this notebook.
That's this notebook.
Yeah, it's an yes. So I should have pointed that out.
Yeah.
And it just happens that you know, both of these are in the same file, and maybe maybe this could say something a little more intelligent. I guess maybe. Let me just jump ahead a second to, you know, this is where the breadcrumb trail is going through multiple files, right? And so now, you know, this is compiler file 1.wl line, you know, X, and you've got all of these, and then of course the thing at the very bottom would be this notebook. Maybe that's a slightly clearer, you know, version of this.
I understand. I'm sorry, I'm totally confused. There's a message. The message comes from a single piece of code somewhere, right?
Correct.
So why does it have a big stack of provenance here? Isn't it? This message was generated from an error in this particular
well, two problems. I think that's not okay. Two problems with that. One, I think there might be cases where that's not entirely true because it has to do with some sort of type thing where it's solving and it couldn't find a solution, and there are multiple conflicting things that maybe, you know, scattered about in a somewhat complicated way. But I'm not even sure that's the real reason I think it's like this is just that you often need the trace because the base error is something, you know, something stupid. Like if you ever look at a real stack trace, like, you know, the kernel crashes and you look at the stack trace, it'll be like the actual thing that crashes is like in eval, and it'll be some random, oh, it accessed a pointer that was null or something like that. That's not where the real error is.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you need to step up
Yeah.
1 or 2 frames in the stack to find what calling wrong call of the function.
No, but do you
wrong
have enough
argument.
information in the compiler to go up the? I'm confused. How does it know?
It knows what function it's compiling. It has the chain of functions, you know, in the chain of functions. It has that information. And if it was loaded from a file, it knows what file it's loaded from. It doesn't know what, at the moment, doesn't know what line it's coming from.
Okay.
Right.
So in that top case, when it is the current file, it really should say current file. It shouldn't give the name of the file. It's too weird to give the name of the file.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
It doesn't totally know that it's the current file, actually, the current notebook. It doesn't really know that.
Really?
well, it knows the name of the notebook and it knows the name of the current notebook, so it can probably
Hang
put
on,
two and
but
two
how do
together.
you know you didn't have a definition written in a different notebook?
That happen to be called the same thing and with the same file
No,
path or
I
something.
put that func equals function in a different notebook, and then I ran function compile in this notebook.
Sure, but then it would say that other notebook name, but then for the line and from this notebook,
How
would
does
just
it
say current
know? But
notebook.
it doesn't know that it came from another notebook.
Why not? If it knows what notebook it came from and it knows the name of the
But
current
it doesn't.
Oh, this is a different problem. Okay, this isn't a problem with the,
Yeah.
this is a technical problem with knowing what notebook it came from.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's kind of the same as my skepticism about whether we can actually put the cell here as well. I
It's
guess
even
the
more
same kind of
fundamental
thing.
than that. We don't even know what notebook it came from.
Well, then we
Well,
can't
indeed,
annotate it. I mean, then Noah's annotation there is irrelevant anyway. So we're just giving the piece of
That's right.
But
When it's
wait,
loaded from a
that's not
file,
actually. I don't think that's true because the point is that you can still get, you'll lose the formatting and stuff, but you can still get the actual expression. So you can still do an annotation like that, but it won't have the formatting, even if you don't know where it came from.
sure. That's all true. Yeah, it has to be reformatted in the thing. Yeah.
right. But I mean, but all we're saying is you can't annotate it with that file information, Noah, because it may not be.
Correct. That's correct.
sure.
Yes.
So is that true of these as well then?
No, it knows when it's loaded from a file, it knows what file it's come from.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I've said that. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
sorry. Yes.
Sorry, yeah, I've misunderstood. Okay, so I need to think of something else to kind of label these with. Okay.
Yeah.
If anything.
If anything.
Yeah. You need some heading because
I mean, there are
they're
some
collapsed by the block.
other annotations it could put, like these functions have names in the type environment. It could have that. They have types. It could have that. I mean, there are some things that it could put that might be useful.
All right, let me just zoom out what we're achieving here. Okay, the main point is that is simply to be able to show. I mean, ultimately, we'd like to be able to click and see the source code in order to know where to edit the source code that might be problematic, so to speak. Right?
Correct.
But this is a second best to that of just being able to see the annotated code that has a problem.
I think this would be useful. I don't know, like Mark, what do you think this would be useful?
Yeah, if you had the type markup of the calling function too, and then you had the type there of the function typed integer 64, say it's a floating point being called with floats or something like that, then you'd immediately see, it's a type mismatch or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And and that would be okay, Stephen wants it done like to actually suggest something, but at least here you have a visual indication of.
No, that's a good start.
So it's a starting point to getting to the
Yeah.
point that Stephen wants. So
Yeah,
Yeah, I
but
would find
what
this
you're
very
saying,
useful.
Mark, is just have more information. I mean, what Noah is
Yes,
providing
yeah,
here
yeah,
is purely the code that was problematic highlighted with a specific piece of that code.
yeah.
What
But
you're
maybe
saying
add
is
add a little bit of extra, like the calling function has the type signature or something of the calling function too, or the
yeah,
type.
but then Noah has to invent UX to represent that. That's the point here.
Yeah, okay. I don't know how hard it is, but no, it's just
Well,
a
no,
suggestion.
no, but
Noah is
that's-
a resourceful guy, and we have meetings like this.
Yeah,
Right,
I
but
mean,
that's the whole point is that if you define the information, like what Noah has here is he's showing the file that the thing is coming from.
yeah,
What you're
yeah,
saying is you want to see the function it's coming from, which is
Yeah,
a slightly different thing. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that
And
seems
the
like
type and the type signature too, because then you can match it with the type signature of the call there, and that would be sort of an additional thing that you could probably catch. But I mean, you could have additional information, even collapse it down, and you could click on it to open it up, and you know it could be layered. I don't know exactly how it should be structured or whatever, but certainly, yeah, we can add to this.
okay, but so let's just figure out what we need to figure out for this meeting. So you know, Noah was presenting this UX. What is this the primary thing that we have to deal with in this meeting?
This is the primary thing in this meeting. There's a couple of other things we discussed last week, or maybe it was the week before, about you know, a typed hint and an if compiled. But this is the main thing. So
okay, well, I mean, looks to me like if this is implementable, then it sounds to me like there's some additional tagging that's needed, which is the name of the function that the thing is in. I mean, I don't understand. Does the function always have a name? I mean, in a function declaration, it has a name, but there's an anonymous.
no, it could be a Lambda function. It doesn't always have a name. You're correct.
Okay. Well, so we just need. Okay. So, okay, what else do we need to figure out here?
Well, just does this seem sensible? You know, is this a reasonable direction?
Let's. The word source seems okay. The way the tray opens up seems okay. I mean, it's a little bit visually, the fact that it's so that the message is in comparatively small type. I mean, I think you go down a font size or something, perhaps, in the code that you have inside this box.
Well, I think it's nice if it's the same size as the code outside of it.
Possibly so.
But maybe a similar thing would be, and maybe this already exists, but it would be nice if you could have some corner or something that you can drag and make the pane bigger. Just if you have a giant piece of code.
Yes. Okay. And meanwhile, the highlighting color. I mean, is that red under whatever? Is that real, or is that what do you imagine is the full annotation that you are giving to the incorrect code?
As in, so sorry, I don't understand the question. As in, that's what's on.
Yeah, I'm asking you.
It would be marked up with like
two
a
things.
pink background.
Right, you got a squiggly and you got a pink background. Which is the thing that you? So is that what you are proposing? Is the way of indicating the error area?
Oh, I see. Yeah. Which is like, which is how we do it currently in code analysis.
Okay, well, fine.
But I don't like squigglies because sometimes they hide things at the bottom. You can't see what letter it is or something because the squigglies.
Well,
maybe it's
not going
only
to work that pure pink. Pure pink is not going to be strong enough.
red, or could there be like a?
Well, we could just underline.
Well, maybe that's a bug with squigglies, and they should be placed a little bit lower or something like that.
Yeah,
I think we use them in lots of places. So if there are cases where it's actually unreadable, that's kind of a bug.
Yeah. So let's solve that. I think the squiggly is the right thing. Okay, so can we move on here? So then you've got this kind of these two mechanisms. You've got this iframe-like mechanism where it's a scrollable thing. You've got the specification of where it's from with the opener. Now you have this one additional thing where you probably want to say line blah 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 dash and then the name of the function if there is a function name there.
Sure.
that make sense?
Yeah. And so in the case where it's coming from, in the case where it's not being called from a file, is there something useful, like, is there something that we'd always have that would be sensible to use as the label?
Well, do we know where it's coming from in terms of DOM pointers or whatever, or what? Do we know anything about where it came from?
No, we don't know anything about it.
So it's just a unidentified flying piece of code that we reconstituted and printed here. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct.
Okay. Well, then I think we put.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing sort of immediately sensible to put here, then I can think of like an icon or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay.
Why do you need an icon? Why isn't it just scroll up? Why isn't it just the same as you had in the case where you had a pure?
Well, it may be large and it needs to be collapsed to begin with, right? So,
what may be large? I don't understand how it's large. If it's large, why isn't it that iframing thing?
It would be, but it would be, but the point being is that it needs to be collapsible, and then when you collapse it, what's it going to say? Like, it needs like the opener. It needs a. Well, I suppose we could not have a label on the opener, but it feels like there should be something there.
Yeah, no, imagine you have 10 openers and they're all unlabeled. It's kind of like,
why is there why is there an opener at all? Why isn't it just in your first example you just had the code right there?
Well, it's not unwieldy. So, because I mean, if all of these were opened by default, then...
No, that's hopeless. That's hopeless. But I'm saying, if one of them is open, if there's only one, okay, in the case of unidentified flying code, there is only one thing. Is that not correct?
That is not correct.
Okay.
Because you might have one piece of code from the notebook, but then that piece of code then calls something from your package, which then has all sorts of stuff.
Which is the example here, right? Because the thing furthest away from the source was, something called in this notebook.
And that will basically always be the case, that there's something in your notebook that failed, and then there's a bunch of stuff in the package that failed, if you're ever doing something with a package.
So you need a mechanism. Oh, God. Node, please speak verbally if you have something to say. Okay?
Well, I didn't want to interrupt the flow of the conversation, but like, if you have a lot of code and there's like a function compiled somewhere in the middle of your code, then that message can appear many pages down in your notebook. So it's might be nice to be able to, get that side by side, or like in the sense that I guess you can copy out the cell, but if there's a button that basically says, okay, pop this out into a palette or another notebook, then it's a little bit easier to fix your code without having to scroll up and down, up and down, up and down all the time.
Actually, that was on the to-do list ages ago for lint pods, and I think it was just forgotten about. So yes, I absolutely agree, and it should be done.
Can you copy this, Noah? Can you copy this another notebook? Right? You can't, can you?
Yeah. Well, can you copy it? Can you?
If I select that outer bracket, copy, and make a new notebook and paste, this thing's gone, hasn't it? Is that right?
Why?
Sorry, you mean the interface?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Because it shouldn't serialize, which I think is correct. And so, although, and I think that's what I've written at the bottom. Although these provenance pods have been shown with kind of this message style cell bracket, I think they're actually going to have to be implemented as attached cells, inline attached cells somehow.
Okay, but the message will serialize. The message at the top will serialize. It's just that the provenance pod will not.
Yeah, I mean,
yes,
it's a little bit inconvenient because I might want to copy that into a notebook and have it side by side and then search up and down for.
Well, that's what Arnaud is saying. So, that would be a breakout thing where the thing breaks out into a palette of some kind.
Yeah, I think
the message may just be like, 15 pages down the notebook, and then you have to scroll up and down to kind of see what you did wrong. And I mean, that's the problem.
But sorry, why exactly?
Go ahead.
Go on, Chris. Oh, okay. I was going to say, Tom's right in the sense that, like, okay, this attached piece will disappear because it's just an inline cell. But once you've copied this message into a new notebook to the side, you can just click on the source button again and open.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, why not have it pop out into a palette? That seems perfectly sensible.
Yeah, I like that, because then you can use it, side by side or something.
All right. So the one thing we have to figure out here is, what does it say when it's unidentified flying code? What is the analog of, and is it always at the top? Is it always the first entry that's the unidentified code?
You're the last one.
No, it's the other way around. It's the other way around, isn't it?
No, because this is at the top. This is like sort of organized the way an inbox would be organized, right? So the thing that's kind of closest to actually the source of the message is at the top.
Yeah.
Okay,
the unidentified code's at the bottom.
Yes.
Well, but it's not always, because for example, you could have something where, always you'll have some unidentified code at the bottom if you're calling it from a notebook. But
Yes.
then maybe, you fed some Lambda function, or you fed some function name to, this giant package but you defined that function in a notebook. And so, both the top and the bottom will be unidentified.
Okay, fine. So then there needs to be some way of indicating two things. Okay, so it could be, is it the two types of information? Where did it come from file-wise, and what is the name of the function that it came from? When are those available? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Sorry, so you want to know the file? Sorry, I was thinking about.
No, I'm saying there are two pieces of information that are potentially displayable on Noah's annotation lines.
Right.
One is the file name, and the other is the function name. Right?
Correct, and maybe the function type as well.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Fine.
Right. So
Well,
the function name, if it has one, is always available, and the function type, if one was given, is always available.
I get it. And the function, they're all three of these things are you might have it or you might not. Is
Correct.
that dependence on which one you have? That if you have one, then you have to have another type thing.
No. I could make some.
Okay. All right. Fine. So we just need to. So Noah just needs a UX and design for those three pieces of information available as annotations at every place here.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else we need to figure out here?
Yeah, I have a question. So do I know where the compiler file to WL is? So which directory it is without
That's what that presumably is what that arrow.
But that opens the right.
It will be reasonable to have a mouse over that says what the
Yeah.
Sorry, the question was, is it possible to see the entire directory of this file? Is that, was that?
The suggestion is to have a mouse over.
Tooltip.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then clicking that obviously opens opens the file.
Okay, and so the other piece of this is the pop out of this thing as a palette, so that you can see it independent of its location, so to speak, so that you can scroll up and down in your notebook and still have on screen the information on what the error was. Right?
Yes, and we've got UX mechanisms, none of which have been implemented, but we've designed for solving this similar problem in both the notebook toolbar and previously in code analysis. So I'll just look back at those and figure out something that will work here.
Okay. All right.
Cool.
All right. What else do we have to figure out in this meeting?
Well, I did write something about annotations.
Share, please.
So should I share?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, fine. Right. So this is for the workflow of migrating top-level code to be compiled.
Yep.
And this is some annotations. And these are things we talked about the other day. So I just wrote them down. Yep. Right, fine. So this is typed hint is a thing we considered where you can put this into a function.
I understand, but it evaluates away.
Yeah. The compiler uses it, but the evaluator, throws it away.
Okay.
I mean, is this the right name? Do we want this?
I think we want this, but I'm not sure about, I'm wondering about the name. But let's talk about its semantics again for a second. Okay.
Fine.
So this is in the source code. And
Yes.
in an unevaluated thing, like a pure function like this, it would still be there.
Correct. So it's not a replacement for typed. You know,
Yeah, I mean,
not-
typed is something which has its own separate existence and its own separate calculus.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, which
And-
is that it doesn't have any top level calculus.
and
It
it
just
does
doesn't
and it
evaluate.
the fact that it doesn't have it, right? Exactly. Does not, must not evaluate.
Yeah.
Ever.
Okay. Okay, but so the point of this is that you put this in code and you're spraying this into code in kind of the hopes that
Well,
go ahead.
I mean, I just think it's if we have some nice mechanism, I mean, including the stuff that Noah is just showing, where it says, I mean, okay, the 0th thing would be something like what Noah is just showing, where you run it and it says, oh, cannot infer types of this function here, and it highlights it.
Right.
And then you go in your code and you write a typed hint or type hint, around that piece of code to help it. I think that the next fancier thing would be if we had some, I shouldn't even bring this up, but like if we had some, interface where as you're writing it, it's trying to run the type inferencer and it's sort of highlighting your code. So before you even run
that's
it,
a great idea.
you know where it's.
That would be great. Yeah.
Okay, explain to me when you use typed and when you use type hint.
Well, you would use typed as like the formal arguments of variables. Okay, like here, for example, that's when you would use typed.
And so type hint is merely used sort of in the body of code to say, by the way, like an assert or something, by the way, this is the type this is supposed to have. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable statement. Yes.
But right now we use types, don't we, Tom?
Right, we do use
Yes.
typed for that, but that stops things
So you
from
want to
evaluating.
restrict that to types to be only the arguments of the
No.
function.
I think you
That's
could
what
use
you're-
typed there. Absolutely, you could use typed there. It's just that
we-
typed is an impediment to writing a function that you can evaluate. You see.
Right. So we wouldn't promote, I think type would still work in that role, but you wouldn't
Absolutely.
promote it.
But there are so
Absolutely.
many functions in the compiler that don't have native anything or compile anything. There's so many functions in the compiler that don't evaluate away. I mean, the goal is to run this function in evaluated code and have it like evaluate, right?
Right.
So you want something that gets stripped away.
Yes, that's the
so
goal.
many array get data. I mean,
Well, so
Well, I think the
what-
goal is to get rid of that, though. I mean, and
but
you
there
know,
are hundreds of them, Chris.
No, I'm
There
sorry.
are
What hundreds
of
of what are they?
the things that we're using to develop the language, and until we have the it's part of the infrastructure of the code base, and there are a lot of things that we use at the moment.
Well, we're not going to go on using them. I mean, the whole point is to be able to look. Our goal is very simple. Our goal is to be able to have a workflow where people normally just write in pure top-level code. They try and compile it. The compiler cannot automatically figure out types. You add type hints so that the compiler has a better chance of figuring out about types, and then it compiles. Anything
Well,
else?
and there are still some compiler only constructs. I mean, I think we've talked about this. I mean, that there are things like,
Right, raw
testing
pointer,
and so on, that
things like
Yeah.
that.
raw pointers,
Pointers.
that really don't exist. But
Yeah,
that's
but so
fine.
that's
Then there's no
fine, yes.
hope.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Just-
This is for a specific workflow. The workflow is
Okay.
you wrote top-level code, you're trying to hint it so that that top-level code can be sent through the compiler.
Right.
If you're writing code that is purely, compilation first and never had a hope of being top-level code, then it's a different story.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that's
Okay.
exactly.
That's clear. That's
Yeah,
clear.
yeah.
So the thing that I'm a little bit, I think type hint isn't good. I think type hint is more promising.
Yeah, I agree. Although it is a little unfortunate with the other typed, but yeah.
Well, but it isn't in a sense because type says it really is this type. type hint is merely a hint.
Well, no. It is saying it really is this type. If it isn't this type, everything, it's going to fail.
What's saying that? Type hint is saying
Type
that.
hint, like type hint. If you tell it type hint, I think this is a machine integer, and then it says, and then the type inferencer says, I can guarantee it's a machine real. That will be an error. It's not just going to be like, the hint was, I'm going to ignore it. It cannot ignore it.
Well, fair enough. But I mean, I think we're delicately saying it's a hint, even though it really isn't a hint.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's a hint in the sense that it's not like, you don't have to specify it. You don't, in many cases, you're going to kind of. What was that?
Well, I mean, the main point here is, how do we signal the fact that this is, if we are saying this is like typed, except that it evaporates on evaluation?
Well, I think we're not necessarily going to say that. So here's the thing, right? With typed right now, we advertise 2 usages of typed. One of them is in basically the sort of the declaration language. So it's how you refer to the arguments of functions, and it's how you refer to the types of in function declarations and stuff like that, right? And that's kind of mostly outside of compiled code. The other usage of type that we advertise is for inside of compiled code, for telling it, by the way, when I run 2 + x, the output of that should be a packed array or something like that, right? And so I think the idea would be to stop advertising that second usage as typed, and only, I mean, it'll still work, but we won't advertise it. But then type hint will replace that usage. But type hint would not be used, in function arguments and stuff like that, because it would
declarations, correct. Yeah.
Well,
so they would actually have completely disjoint usages. It's just that type hint will take over something that typed currently does.
And the reason that we have a typed in that second, in the body type place.
Well, this is a bad example.
No, I don't care. I don't care.
Right.
I don't care. The reason that we have typed inside the body right now is what? I mean,
it can't always figure out the types. I mean, there might be
cases
cases
where
it's
it's
ambiguous.
It really is hinting.
Yeah,
because
the type
ambiguous.
It is an example, Stephen. You've got an intermediary expression in the body there that's not part of the type signature. So it's not one of the input types, and it's not the output type of the type signature. It's an intermediary type with a short-term lifespan that you can't ascertain, that you can't.
Well, okay, fine.
Infer the type of.
Okay, for some reason you can't infer the type.
Yeah.
Maybe because the functions are polymorphic in some way.
Yeah, it might be a numeric array or packed array. Numeric array or packed array. You don't know which of the two it is. You know the type and the rank, but you don't know which of the two.
But is there a deterministic thing that it is? It's just we don't know it, or is it the case?
Often you have a choice.
Array or dense array, and you have a choice between a packed array or numeric array, but you don't know which of the ones it is.
So for example, to take a similar example to what Mark is saying, like let's say you run total of range of n. Okay, and n is a machine integer, right?
Yep.
The question is, what did range return? It could have returned a packed array, or it could have returned a list vector, or it could have returned a numeric array, or maybe something else, right? And that's, in that case, it doesn't really matter. It could have returned any of them. It probably won't affect the performance that much. Probably packed array is the best choice, but it is legitimately ambiguous, and you might decide to pick which one you want.
Yeah.
Okay, but that really is quite well named as type hint. That case.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that is the case. That is the usage.
More like a cast. I wonder if it's more like a type cast though, and we need to cast anyway, so we need to make cast disappear.
Not necessarily. It's about function selection as well. You see, like creating a list. There are different sorts of lists you might want to create.
Right.
And this is a guide. I mean,
but I like the fact that it has the word hint in it, because it suggests that you can run it without. No, that's not going to work. It's not going to.
Yeah,
work.
fine. Okay.
Maybe type annotate, like annotation.
Well, that sounds too formal, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think it's not bad. I'm a stickler for having a short name, because otherwise I think it disrupts
I agree.
visual of the code.
We could use, like we did with type specifier, this double colon and input the input.
Is
Right.
that
So
plausible?
we've got,
Maybe. Well, I mean, both.
with parentheses.
It's an interesting thought. I mean, I think, right. I mean, there was talk about how doing that with typed too, of giving typed special syntax. But I think part of the problem is that, just that it introduces more APL-like hieroglyphics.
No,
but
we
the other
can't
problem is,
syntax, but maybe we can reuse this syntax in some way.
well,
Remind
right.
me
But
what
the other
syntax
problem is that I think
Yeah.
It's
it's
this.
difficult to, the scoping needs to be very clear with this syntax, because it's hard. You sometimes need to do typed around the head of the expression, sometimes around the whole expression,
correct.
etc.
Yes, yes.
Um,
There are subtleties, yes.
Well, I think we could start off with just it being type hint.
Fine. Okay, so
All right,
we'll add that.
do it. Sounds good to me.
Excellent. Right,
Well,
right, right.
and
Good.
as a random point also is that you might imagine in the category of having special syntax, maybe this is a bad idea. You could imagine having it so that in the I don't know what to call it, the things that Noah was showing, those sort of snack trace looking things, you might imagine showing the type hints in some special way where maybe it doesn't even show the type hint itself, but it only shows it's colored and it has an indicator of what type it is.
Yeah,
Although
yeah.
that might cause all sorts of problems, because maybe the thing you need to change is the type hint. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Right. Well, the question of whether the type hint should show up in a different color is an interesting one. And it's certainly, its typesetting could involve, not wishing to reuse the word typesetting and type hint, because obviously those are,
Slightly disjoint.
yes. But having type hint be a different color seems interesting to me, like having it be gray or something like that.
Well, why don't we color the types a different color, you see, and do that in typed and type hint?
Well, the only thing is that types in general can just be strings. So
Well,
that's
fine, but
sometimes
it could be
difficult.
like
I mean, it can
italic
color
or-
the set like message name or something. Although actually, sorry, I don't think message name really does this, but it could just color whatever the second argument of typed is.
Yes.
That's what I mean. I mean, why
Okay.
not?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it could be some kind of light.
Well,
I'm thinking,
but then it makes maybe, although sometimes I guess if you think of it as this is a way of telling you this is a type hint, that's fine. But if we think of this as this is the color we want for types, there are going to be all sorts of things like cast and so on, where the types are not going to be that color, and then it'll make you sad.
Yeah, they're not always. Yeah, maybe you're.
I mean, it's like one of those things where you learn that
Maybe you're
good
right.
localized variables are green, and then there's some case where actually they
Yeah,
have to
no,
be blue in this case.
you're
That's
right.
like,
Yeah, no,
feel
you're absolutely right.
heated.
It's a bad idea. Right. You're completely right.
Well, I'm not sure that the whole typed thing shouldn't be a different color, and I think that should be investigated. Because I think it make code much, or even what about the following thing, making everything the word typed and its type specification a smaller font.
Ooh, that's scary. I mean, I just think
would
that
you have any
I
particular
predict
thought?
that will look very strange. But
Well, okay, I
don't
think
know.
it might not. I think it might be that it just, depends on how encrusted with type stuff a typical thing is.
Well, this syntax has helped quite a lot, actually.
Okay. Well, all right. Anyway, we've got a direction.
Do you seriously want that to go on the list, or should we just?
Yes, I think. Well, I don't know.
Move
Does Noah
around.
have a comment on that?
Oh, I don't know. I'm so used to working with text files where everything's the same font. It looks like you're putting it on a second level there, and the type
You are.
is quite important here.
No, it
Yeah,
isn't. If it's
yeah.
a type hint, and you're actually going to evaluate it. All right. I
Oh,
think
you mean for the
it's-
type? You mean for the type hint or for the type itself? 'Cause I think
Well, probably both.
I think we mean more for the type hint.
Yes, but more for the type hint.
Okay, I could live with that for the type hint, but not part of the, but
But
not
it
the
looks
type
like-
signature.
Let's
but
look.
not the type
Let's see
signature.
what it looks like when we actually have realistic code. Okay, if you have an example of some realistic code, Tom, we could look at it. Do you have a big chunk of realistic code?
No.
Okay, all right. Let's not worry
Yeah.
about this right now. Let's
Okay.
look at if compiled.
Right, fine. So this is I mean, pretty simple. And actually this would be, and there is a thing like this actually, but it's basically, you know, if it's in evaluated mode, you execute
Yeah.
this, and if you're in compiled mode, you execute
Well, yeah,
that.
right. This seems fine to me. I mean, this seems like a,
Is that the good name?
you know, it's interesting because we've got similar kinds of things where we have a much less streamlined version of it. You know, like, you know, we have variables that say, wait a minute, we have things for the front end, right? Front end execute, and we have another one. The heck is it called? Well, if something that evaluates in the cloud.
Well, we have like front end backtick file name. We have like various functions that evaluate in the front end evaluator.
No. I'm saying
They're
that there's a
different.
thing,
Yeah.
there is a wrapper that means
Well,
evaluate.
in most other environments, you can just have a variable that's like
know.
$am I in the weird environment? And then you can
Yeah,
just say if $I'm in the weird environment, then this, otherwise Y. But the problem is that doesn't work with the compiler because it has to know to not even try and compile the other branch.
Yeah.
This seems reasonable to me.
Right. Okay. Great. I'll implement these.
Please do.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Anything else we have to go
I
over?
think that's everything that we had to think about.
Excellent. Okay. Good stuff, guys. See you all
Right.
soon then.